Sometimes the hardest thing in life is knowing when to help someone, especially when you've got nothing left to give. Josie Brandt learned that lesson the day she handed her last dollar to a dying stranger in the street. She's lived alone in the Sierra Mountains for 15 years, in a cabin she built with her own hands, asking nothing from the world that once broke her. She keeps to herself, minds her business, survives on what the land provides. But when a man collapses in the dust below her ridge, she can't just walk away. So she gives him her final coin, enough for food and a bed. By morning, armed riders arrive in town, looking for only one person, her. What happens when one small act of kindness changes everything? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun broke over the eastern ridge just after 5, painting the high Sierra peaks in shades of copper and gold. Josie Brandt stood on the narrow porch of her cabin, hands wrapped around a tin cup of chicory coffee, watching the light crawl down the mountainside toward the valley below. The air was thin and cold at this elevation, even in late summer, and she pulled her worn wool shawl tighter around her shoulders. She'd built this cabin herself 16 years ago, after Jacob died. Built it with her own scarred hands, one log at a time, on a piece of land so remote that the nearest neighbor was 8 miles down a trail that disappeared under snow 6 months of the year. The cabin wasn't much, a single room with a sleeping loft, a stone fireplace, a root cellar dug into the hillside, but it was hers. Every plank, every nail, every carefully chinked gap between the logs represented a choice she'd made to survive alone. The leather medicine satchel hung by the door, just inside the threshold where she could see it every time she entered or left. She hadn't opened it in years. The brass clasp was tarnished now, the leather cracked and stiff from age and neglect. Inside were the tools of a life she'd abandoned: surgical scissors, a bone saw, packets of silk suture thread gone brittle with time, a few glass vials of carbolic acid that had probably lost their potency. Once those tools had saved lives. Now they were relics, gathering dust in the shadows. Josie finished her coffee and set the cup on the porch rail. The day's work was waiting. There was always work. Firewood to split, water to haul from the spring, the garden to tend, traps to check. She lived by the rhythm of necessity, each task following the last in an endless cycle that left little time for thinking about what came before. She spent the morning in the garden, pulling weeds from between the rows of potatoes and beans. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, fingers dark with soil. The garden wasn't large. She only needed to feed herself, but she'd learned through hard trial which crops could survive at this altitude, which seeds to save, how to coax life from rocky ground that wanted to grow nothing but pine trees and wildflowers. By noon, the sun was high and hot. She retreated to the cabin's shade and ate a simple meal of hard bread and dried venison, washing it down with cold spring water. After eating, she checked her supplies. The flour sack was nearly empty. She was low on salt, out of lamp oil completely. Her last piece of soap had worn down to a sliver. Time for a trip to Pine Bend. She made the journey once a month, always on the 3rd Saturday, always alone. The trail down from her ridge was steep and treacherous in places, winding through dense timber and across boulder fields where a misstep could mean a broken ankle or worse. She walked it with the sure-footedness of long practice, her rifle slung across her back, a leather pouch of coins, her month's savings from selling pelts and herbs, tied to her belt. Pine Bend had been dying for as long as Josie had known it. The silver mines that gave the town its brief moment of prosperity had played out years ago, and now only a handful of stubborn souls remained, clinging to a place that offered them nothing but memories and cheap land. The main street was a rutted dirt track lined with false-fronted buildings, half of them abandoned, their windows broken and their doors hanging loose on rusted hinges. Hiram Polk's general store occupied the corner where the main street met the road that led down the mountain toward the distant railroad. Hiram was a grizzled man in his 70s, bent with age but still sharp-eyed and steady-handed. He'd been kind to Josie from the first day she'd walked into his store, asking nothing about where she'd come from or why she chose to live like she did. That kind of discretion was worth its weight in gold. "Mrs. Brandt," he said when she entered, using the courtesy title she'd never corrected. The bell above the door jangled. "Right on schedule. Hiram." She nodded, setting her pouch on the scarred wooden counter. "Flour, salt, lamp oil. Soap if you've got it. Got everything but the soap. Shipment's late." He began gathering her supplies, moving with the careful deliberation of old bones and practiced routine. "How's the ridge treating you?" "Same as always." She glanced around the store while he worked. Shelves lined with canned goods, bolts of cloth, hand tools, ammunition. Everything a person might need to survive in country that didn't forgive mistakes. "Town seems quieter than usual. Henderson's pulled out last week. Took their 3 boys and headed back east. Hiram wrapped her flour in brown paper, tied it with string. That makes 5 families gone since spring. Won't be much left here before long." She nodded but didn't comment. The slow death of places like Pine Bend was as inevitable as winter. People came chasing dreams of easy wealth, and when the dreams ran dry, they moved on to chase new ones. Only the stubborn or the desperate stayed behind. Across the street, the saloon door swung open and a woman emerged, shading her eyes against the afternoon glare. Lottie Green ran the saloon, which meant she ran the social heart of what remained of Pine Bend. She was a handsome woman in her 50s, grey-streaked hair pinned up in a practical bun, wearing a simple calico dress with the sleeves rolled to her elbows. "Josie Brandt," Lottie called, spotting her through the store window. "You planning to hide in there all day, or can I steal you for a cup of real coffee?" Josie felt a small smile tug at the corner of her mouth. Lottie was persistent, always trying to draw her into conversation, into connection. Most times Josie resisted, but today she felt an unfamiliar pull toward companionship. Maybe it was the emptiness of the town, the sense of things ending. Maybe she was just tired of her own solitude. "Go on," Hiram said, counting out her change. "I'll have your goods ready when you get back." The saloon was cool and dim inside, smelling of old wood and whiskey. Lottie poured coffee from a pot on the stove, real coffee, not chicory, and they sat at a corner table. For a while they drank in comfortable silence. "You hear about the trouble up north?" Lottie finally asked. "I don't hear about much of anything. Territorial governor's been in the papers. They're saying he's mixed up in some kind of corruption. Supply contracts, something like that." Lottie shook her head. "Politicians are all the same. Take what they can and leave honest people to suffer." Josie's hand tightened on her cup, but her face remained neutral. She knew about corrupt officials, about men who took what didn't belong to them and called it authority. She'd learned that lesson in blood. "There's talk of U.S. Marshals investigating," Lottie continued. "Folks say they've been asking questions in some of the mining camps, looking for witnesses, evidence." She studied Josie over the rim of her cup. "You ever run into marshals back before you came here?" "Once or twice." Josie kept her voice even. "Long time ago." Lottie seemed to sense she was treading on unwelcome ground and changed the subject. They talked about the weather, about Hiram's rheumatism, about the widow Thompson who'd taken in a stray dog. Small talk, the kind that filled space without requiring anything real. As they were finishing their coffee, the saloon door banged open. A boy stumbled in, Tommy Birch, the orphan who worked at the livery stable. He was maybe 13, all skinny limbs and sun-darkened skin, with a shock of brown hair that never stayed combed. His right hand was wrapped in a dirty rag, and blood was seeping through. "Miss Lottie," he gasped. "Cut myself on a fence nail. It won't stop bleeding." Josie was on her feet before she'd consciously decided to move. Old instincts buried but never dead. "Let me see." Tommy held out his hand and she unwrapped the rag carefully. The cut was deep, running across his palm from the base of his thumb to his wrist. Not life-threatening, but it needed attention. "Sit down," she told him, her voice taking on the calm authority she'd once used in field hospitals. "Lottie, I need clean water, clean cloth and whiskey. The drinking kind, not the rot gut." Lottie hurried to comply, while Josie examined the wound more closely. No sign of rust or dirt deep in the cut, that was good. The bleeding was already slowing. She pressed clean cloth against it, applying steady pressure. "You're lucky," she told Tommy. "Missed the tendons. But you'll need stitches." The boy went pale. "I don't have money for the doctor." "There is no doctor," Lottie said, returning with the supplies. "Hasn't been one in Pine Bend for 2 years." Josie hesitated. She'd sworn she was done with this, done with healing and all the responsibility it carried. But the boy was looking at her with frightened eyes, and she could feel Lottie watching her, waiting. "I can do it," she heard herself say. "But it's going to hurt, and you have to stay still. Can you do that?" Tommy nodded, swallowing hard. She worked quickly and efficiently, the old skills returning as if she'd never stopped using them. Cleaned the wound with whiskey, threaded a needle with silk thread she kept in her medicine satchel. She'd brought it today, though she wasn't sure why, and placed 7 neat stitches while Tommy bit down on a leather strap and tried not to cry. "There." She tied off the last stitch and wrapped his hand in clean cloth. "Keep it dry and clean. Come see me in a week so I can check it and remove the stitches." "Come see you?" Tommy blinked. "Where?" She realized what she'd said. In a week, she'd be back on her ridge, 8 miles from anywhere. The boy couldn't make that journey. She couldn't expect him to. "I'll be back through in a week," she amended. "Saturday afternoon. Find me at Hiram's store." After Tommy left, his hand properly bandaged and his face showing equal parts relief and admiration, Josie collected her supplies from Hiram and prepared for the long walk home. The sun was already dropping toward the western peaks, and she wanted to be off the trail before full dark. As she shouldered her pack, Hiram cleared his throat. "That was a good thing you did for the boy." "It was nothing." It wasn't nothing to him. The old man studied her with knowing eyes. "I've seen a lot of people come through here over the years, Mrs. Brandt, most of them running from something. But there's different kinds of running. Some folks run because they're cowards. Others run because they're trying to keep themselves alive." He paused. "You've got healing hands. Seems a shame to keep them hidden up on that mountain." Josie didn't answer. She paid for her supplies, hoisted her pack, and left the store without looking back. The climb back to her cabin took 3 hours. By the time she reached her porch, the stars were beginning to show in the darkening sky. She lit her lamp, put away her supplies, and sat by the fire with her tin cup of chicory coffee. The medicine satchel hung by the door, its brass clasp catching the lamplight. She'd opened it today, used the tools inside, remembered what it felt like to put her skills to use, to do what she'd been trained to do. Jacob had always said she had a gift. "You've got healing in your hands, Josie," he used to tell him. "Skenish dis to passados taum." That's not something you can just turn off. But she'd tried. After he died, after she ran, she tried to bury that part of herself along with everything else she'd lost. She finished her coffee and climbed the ladder to her sleeping loft. Tomorrow she'd split wood, check the traps, mend the tear in her spare shirt. The rhythm of survival would continue day after day, until one day she'd be too old to manage it, and winter would claim her like it claimed everything that couldn't adapt. But as she lay in her narrow bed, listening to the wind in the pines, she found herself thinking about Tommy's frightened face and the way his expression had changed when the pain stopped. Found herself thinking about Lottie's words, "Politicians are all the same, take what they can." Found herself remembering things she'd spent 15 years trying to forget. Sleep was a long time coming that night. The third Saturday came around with its usual predictability. Josie made the descent from her ridge in the early morning, when the air was still cool and the light slanted golden through the trees. She carried the same leather pouch, lighter now since she'd spent most of her money the previous month, but heavy enough with a few coins she'd earned from selling rabbit pelts to a trader who passed through once a season. Pine Bend looked even more desolate than it had 4 weeks ago. Another building had been abandoned, the old assay office, its door standing open to reveal an interior stripped of anything valuable. The street was empty except for a stray dog nosing through garbage behind the saloon. Hiram's store was open, as always. The old man greeted her with a nod and began gathering her usual supplies without being asked. But there was a tension in his movements, a tightness around his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Something wrong?" Josie asked. Depends on how you look at it. Hiram kept his voice low, though there was no one else in the store to hear. We had some excitement yesterday. Stranger came through, looked half dead on his feet. Josie felt a prickle of unease. What kind of stranger? The running kind. Young fellow, maybe 30. Sunburned, something fierce, hadn't eaten in days by the look of him. Hiram tied up her flower with practiced motions. Collapsed right there in the street, front of Lottie's place. Nobody moved to help. Times being what they are, folks don't have much to spare. Where is he now? That's the thing. Hiram met her eyes. He's still at the saloon. Lottie let him sleep in one of the back rooms, but he can't pay. Can't even afford a meal. She's been feeding him scraps, but she can't keep doing it. She's barely getting by herself. Josie finished her business with Hiram and crossed the street to the saloon. Inside, Lottie was sweeping the floor, her movements mechanical and tired. She looked up when Josie entered, and relief washed across her face. Thank God, I was hoping you'd come by. She set the broom aside. I've got a situation, Hiram told me. He's in the back room. Been sleeping mostly, but he woke up about an hour ago asking for water. Josie, I've never seen a man so used up. Whatever he's running from, it's bad. Let me see him. Lottie led her through the saloon to a narrow hallway lined with doors. The last room was barely large enough for a cot and a chair. The stranger lay on the cot, covered with a thin blanket. His face was gaunt, cheekbones sharp beneath sun-damaged skin. His lips were cracked and bleeding. He couldn't have weighed more than 140 pounds. Josie's healer's eye catalogued the signs automatically. Severe dehydration, malnutrition, exposure, probably hadn't had a decent meal in weeks. His breathing was shallow but steady. He'd live if someone took care of him. Can you help him? Lottie asked. He needs food. Small amounts at first. Broth, bread soaked in milk. Clean water, rest. Josie studied the man's face, trying to place something familiar in his features. Did he say his name? No, hasn't said much of anything. Lottie wrung her hands. Josie, I want to help him, but I can't afford to feed him for free. I'm barely making enough to keep my own doors open. Josie understood. Kindness was a luxury in hard times. She reached into her pouch and counted out her coins. $6. Everything she'd brought for her own supplies this month. It would be enough for a few days of food and a room at least. But as she held the coins in her palm, weighing them against the stranger's need, something made her hesitate. She thought of Tommy and his bleeding hand, of the way Hiram had looked at her when he said healing hands were a shame to keep hidden, of her husband's voice, 15 years dead but still echoing in her memory. You can't just turn it off. The stranger's eyes flickered open. They were blue, faded like old denim, and they fixed on Josie with an intensity that startled her. I know you, he whispered. His voice was a ruined rasp, barely audible. Josie went very still. We've never met, yes. He tried to lift his head, failed. Field hospital, 67. You treated me for a bullet wound. His hand moved beneath the blanket, emerged holding something. A worn cavalry button, the brass tarnished dark with age. You saved my life. The button bore a regimental number she didn't recognize. Not U.S. cavalry? Not any of the regular units she'd worked with during the border conflicts. Something else. Something irregular. I don't remember you, she said, which was true. She'd treated hundreds of men in those years, maybe thousands. Faces blurred together after a while, one wounded soldier indistinguishable from the next. You wouldn't. The stranger's eyes closed again. We weren't supposed to exist. Lottie was watching this exchange with growing confusion. Josie, you know this man? No, but uncertainty crept through her certainty. There were gaps in her memory of those years, periods she'd deliberately not thought about for 15 years. Classified operations, units with no official record, men who fought and died in conflicts that never made the newspapers. She'd treated some of them, signed documents swearing never to speak of what she'd seen. The stranger's breathing had deepened. He was unconscious again, or near enough. Josie made her decision. She pressed all $6 into Lottie's hand. Give him food, a clean room, whatever he needs. This should cover a few days. Josie, this is all your money. I'll manage. But your supplies, I'll come back next month. She turned toward the door, suddenly desperate to be away from this place, from this stranger who claimed to know her. Wait, Lottie caught her arm. What if he needs medical attention? What if he gets worse? Then send someone up to my cabin. The words came out harsher than she intended. But I can't stay. I need to get back. She left the saloon without looking back, her pouch empty, her supplies unpurchased. The walk back to her cabin passed in a blur. Her mind kept returning to the stranger's face, his words, that cavalry button with its unfamiliar markings. By the time she reached her ridge, the sun was setting. She stood on her porch, looking down at the valley where Pine Bend was already lost in shadow. Smoke rose from Lottie's chimney. Somewhere down there, the stranger was sleeping in a room paid for with her last dollars. She'd given everything to someone she didn't know, based on nothing more than a healer's instinct and a claim she couldn't verify. It was foolish, reckless, the kind of thing she'd spent 15 years training herself not to do. But as she lay awake that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The careful isolation she'd built around herself had developed a crack, and through that crack the world she'd run from was beginning to seep back in. Morning came with a clarity that felt almost cruel. She rose, made her chicory coffee, and went through her morning routine with mechanical precision. The garden needed weeding. The firewood needed splitting. Life on the ridge continued, regardless of what happened in the valley below. But around mid-morning, as she was carrying water from the spring, she noticed something that made her stop. Dust rising from the valley road. A lot of dust. She set down her buckets and retrieved her spyglass, Jacob's old naval glass, one of the few possessions she'd kept from their life together. Through the lens, she counted 12 riders moving in disciplined formation along the road toward Pine Bend. They weren't drifters or miners or any of the usual traffic. Their horses were too good, their movement too organized. They rode like soldiers, or lawmen, or something in between. She watched them for 20 minutes as they entered the town and dismounted. The leader was a tall man, older than the others, wearing a long coat despite the heat. He moved with authority, giving orders that sent his men fanning out through the streets. They were searching for something, or someone. Josie lowered the spyglass, her heart beating faster than it should. She thought of the stranger with his cavalry button and his claims of knowing her. Thought of Lottie's words about U.S. Marshals investigating corruption. Through the glass again, she watched the tall man enter Hiram's store. Saw Hiram emerge a few minutes later, saw him point up toward the ridge. Toward her cabin. She'd been found. The riders began ascending the mountain trail in groups of 4. Spread out enough that no ambush could take them all. Professional, experienced, not the kind of men you ran from easily. Josie went inside her cabin and lifted the medicine satchel from its hook. She opened it for the second time in 15 years and looked at the tools inside. Then she reached behind the satchel to the shelf Jacob had built and took down his rifle. It was clean and oiled. She'd maintained it even though she hadn't fired it since the day he died. She loaded the rifle with steady hands and took up a position where she could watch the trail. Whatever was coming, she would face it standing. She'd spent 15 years running. Maybe Hiram had been right. Maybe it was time to stop. The riders took their time ascending the trail. Josie watched them through Jacob's spyglass, tracking their progress with the same careful attention she'd once used to assess battlefield conditions. They moved like men who knew what they were doing, checking sightlines, keeping proper intervals, never bunching up enough to present an easy target. She counted 8 of them in this group. 4 more must have stayed in Pine Bend. The tactical part of her mind, the part she'd tried to bury along with everything else, noted the smart deployment. Leave enough men to control the town. Send enough to handle whatever you found on the mountain. These weren't amateurs. The leader rode at the front of the column. Through the glass, she could make out more details now. He was in his late 50s, weathered face creased with lines that spoke of a life spent outdoors. His coat was well made but worn at the edges. A glimpse of metal at his hip, armed, but not in the aggressive way of men looking for trouble. More like someone who'd learned to be prepared. They stopped 50 yards from her cabin, where the trail opened into the small clearing she'd carved from the forest. The leader raised his hand, and the others halted. He dismounted slowly, deliberately, making sure his hands were visible. "Mrs. Brandt," he called out. His voice carried clearly in the mountain air, deep and steady. "Josie Brandt, we mean you no harm." She remained behind the woodpile she'd chosen as cover, rifle braced against a sturdy log, sights centered on the man's chest. She didn't respond. "Let them wonder. Let them worry. My name is Boaz Quinn." He took a single step forward, no more. "I'm a U.S. Marshal, Western District. I'm going to reach into my coat now and show you my badge." Slow and easy, he did exactly what he said he would, drawing back his coat with 2 fingers to reveal a silver star pinned to his vest. From this distance, she couldn't read the engraving, but the badge looked genuine enough. "We need to talk about the man you helped yesterday," Quinn continued. "His name is Silas Cormack. I believe he told you he knows you, so the stranger had a name. Silas Cormack. It meant nothing to her, but then again, she'd deliberately forgotten most of the names from those years. "I'd like to come closer," Quinn said. "Have a conversation like reasonable people. My men will stay where they are." "You have my word." Josie considered this. If they'd wanted to rush her, they could have tried. The fact that Quinn was talking meant he wanted something other than violence. Information, most likely. Or cooperation. She stood slowly, letting the rifle lower, but not setting it aside. "That's close enough, Marshal. Say what you came to say." Quinn nodded, seeming unsurprised that she'd been there all along. "Silas Cormack is wanted across 3 territories. Desertion, theft of military property, conspiracy. We've been tracking him for 8 months. Then you should be pleased I gave him my last dollar. Makes him easier to find." A ghost of a smile crossed Quinn's weathered face. "You gave him your last dollar?" "I gave it to the saloon keeper to feed him and give him a room. Didn't seem right to let a man die in the street when a few dollars might save him. That's what we heard." Hiram Polk told us the whole story. Quinn paused. "Cormack disappeared from the saloon sometime before dawn. Left nothing behind but this." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket and held it up. Even from 40 feet away, Josie could see it was old, the creases dark with handling. "It's a map," Quinn said. "Crude one, but clear enough. Shows the location of your old field hospital from the border conflicts. Got medical symbols marked on it and a designation, FMC Station 7. That mean anything to you? Frontier Medical Corps, Station 7. The words hit her like a physical blow. She hadn't heard that designation in 15 years. Hadn't let herself think about it. Station 7 had been her assignment for 2 years. The place where she'd learned that saving lives sometimes required making impossible choices. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. But her voice had lost its steady edge. "Mrs. Brandt," Quinn's tone gentled. "Josie, I know who you are. I know you served as a field medic during the territorial conflicts. I know you were stationed at Fort Callaway, then reassigned to Station 7 when things got bad in the border region. I know you treated soldiers and civilians both, never asking which side they fought for. And I know your husband, Jacob Brandt, was killed by territorial rangers in the fall of 1868. The rifle trembled in her hands. No one had spoken Jacob's name aloud to her in 15 years. No one had mentioned Station 7 or Fort Callaway or any of the other places that haunted her dreams. I also know, Quinn continued, his voice careful now, that you killed 2 of those rangers in self-defense, that there was a 3rd man who escaped, and that you've been running ever since because powerful people wanted you silenced." Josie's finger moved inside the trigger guard. "If you know all that, Marshal, then you know I can't help you. And you know I've got nothing to say. I'm not here to arrest you." Quinn spread his hands. "Those charges were trumped up. Everyone who matters knows it. But there are still men who'd like to see you dead, which is why I'm guessing you've been careful to stay invisible all these years." "Then why are you here?" "Because Silas Cormack left you that map for a reason. Because he recognized you when you helped him, just like he said. And because what he's running from connects to something bigger than just him." Quinn took another slow step forward. Behind him, his men remained mounted and still, but Josie could feel their attention focused on this conversation. One wrong word, one sudden movement, and the situation could turn deadly. "There's a conspiracy involving the territorial governor," Quinn said. "Medical supplies meant for frontier outposts and reservation hospitals are being diverted and sold. People are dying because they don't have access to basic medicine. Morphine, antiseptic, surgical supplies, all of it disappearing into corrupt hands. Cormac found evidence while working as a supply clerk. When he tried to report it, they tried to silence him. That's why he ran. Despite herself, Josie felt the old anger stirring. She'd seen what happened when supplies didn't arrive, watched soldiers die from infected wounds that should have healed, watched civilians suffer because there was no clean bandage, no laudanum, no carbolic acid. If Quinn was telling the truth, why did he come to Pine Bend? She asked. We're not sure. Maybe he thought he could disappear here. Maybe he knew the town was dying and figured no one would look. Quinn met her eyes. Or maybe he was looking for you specifically, because that map suggests he knew where to find someone who'd understand what he'd discovered. I don't have any evidence. I don't know anything about missing supplies, but you know about Station 7. You know what was there, what records might have survived. And Cormac's map suggests something important is still at that location. Josie lowered the rifle completely, though she didn't set it down. The weight of it in her hands felt both familiar and foreign, like picking up a tool she'd once known how to use, and finding her skills had rusted. If Cormac wanted my help, why did he run? That's what we need to find out. Quinn gestured to his men, a subtle signal that had them dismounting and loosening their positions. Mrs. Brandt, I'm asking you to help us. Not as a lawman making demands, but as someone who's spent months trying to stop men from profiting off other people's suffering. Cormac's evidence could expose a corruption that reaches all the way to the territorial capital. But we need to find him first, and we need to understand why that map leads to your old station. Josie looked past Quinn to his men. They were older than she'd expected, weathered and serious. Not glory seekers or politicians in uniforms. They looked like men who'd seen enough of the world to understand that justice was complicated and often came too late. She thought of the stranger, Cormac, lying in that narrow room at Lottie's saloon, half dead from running. Thought of the cavalry button with its mysterious markings. Thought of her last $6 spent on someone who'd disappeared before dawn. I need to think about this, she finally said. Quinn nodded as if he'd expected nothing else. We'll make camp down the trail. Take the time you need. But Mrs. Brandt, Josie, if we don't find Cormac soon, the men who are chasing him will. And those men don't take prisoners. Quinn and his men made camp in a clearing 200 yards down the trail, far enough to give Josie space but close enough to respond if needed. She watched them through her spyglass as they unsaddled their horses, set up a basic camp, and posted sentries with the practiced efficiency of men who'd done this 1,000 times before. One of the younger marshals, she guessed him to be in his early 30s, dark-haired and lean, moved with particular grace as he tended the horses. Something in the way he handled the animals, the patience and care, reminded her painfully of Jacob. Her husband had possessed that same gentle competence with living things, whether they were horses or people or the half-wild dogs that sometimes found their way to their homestead. She turned away from the window and forced herself to think clearly. Quinn's story had the ring of truth to it, but truth could be a weapon as easily as a lie. She'd learned that lesson the hard way. The medicine satchel still hung by the door. She took it down and carried it to the table, then sat and opened it fully for the first time in years. The tools inside were exactly as she'd left them. Surgical scissors, their blades still sharp. A bone saw she'd hoped never to use again. Silk suture thread, brittle now but still intact. Glass vials of carbolic acid that might or might not still be potent. And beneath the tools, wrapped in oilcloth and tucked into a hidden pocket she'd sewn into the lining herself, the brass surgeon's key. She lifted it out carefully. It was smaller than a regular key, ornately worked, with the letters FMC engraved on the bow. One of only 12 ever made, issued to senior field medics who'd earned enough trust to carry emergency supplies of morphine and other controlled substances. The keys opened special lockboxes that were meant to be tamper-proof, each one individually numbered and tracked. She'd kept hers when she fled, partly because it was valuable and partly because destroying it would have been an admission that she was never going back. As long as she had the key, some part of her could pretend she might return to healing someday. Now Quinn was suggesting that Key might unlock more than just medical supplies. That somewhere in the ruins of Station 7, there might be records that could prove corruption at the highest levels. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She slipped the key back into the satchel and retrieved her rifle before answering. Quinn stood on her porch, alone and empty-handed. The afternoon sun cast long shadows behind him. "May I come in?" he asked. She stepped aside without speaking, and he entered, removing his hat as he did. His eyes moved around the cabin's interior, taking in the spare furnishings, the neat organization, the life reduced to essentials. If he was judging, it didn't show on his weathered face. Coffee? She found herself offering, surprised by her own hospitality. "If you're making some." She put water on to boil and measured out her precious chicory. They sat across from each other at her small table, and for a while neither spoke. Quinn seemed comfortable with silence, which she appreciated. Too many people felt the need to fill quiet spaces with empty words. "You said you know who I am," Josie finally said. "But you haven't explained how. The Marshal's Service doesn't keep records going back that far, and most of what happened during the border conflicts was deliberately forgotten. I was there." Quinn's answer was simple and direct. "Not at Station 7 specifically, but I was a cavalry scout working the same region during the same years. I heard about the field medic who treated anyone who needed it, regardless of what uniform they wore or weren't wearing. The stories about you were legendary, Mrs. Brandt. You saved a lot of lives. I also failed to save a lot of lives. That's the nature of the work. You did what you could with what you had." He paused. "I also knew your husband, though not well. We crossed paths a few times. He was a good man." Josie's throat tightened. "Yes, he was. I didn't know about his death until years later, when I started investigating territorial corruption. Found the old reports, saw the patterns. The rangers who killed him were working for a land syndicate that wanted to clear out homesteaders. Your husband's death was meant to be a warning, and when you fought back, it became an embarrassment. They couldn't admit that a woman had killed 2 of their men, so they tried to bury the whole story. They did bury it. And me along with it." Quinn met her eyes. "You did what you had to do to survive. No one faults you for that. But things are different now. The Territorial Rangers were disbanded 5 years ago, broken up after too many scandals. The men who wanted you silenced are mostly dead or in prison themselves. You could come down from this mountain, Mrs. Brandt. You could live a normal life. This is my normal life, is it? Or is it just the place you've been hiding?" The water boiled. Josie stood and poured it over the chicory grounds, glad for something to do with her hands. When she set the cups on the table, Quinn nodded his thanks. "Tell me about Cormac," she said. "The truth this time. Not the official story, but what you really think." Quinn considered this for a long moment. "I think he's a man who saw something he wasn't supposed to see and tried to do the right thing. I think he's been running for 8 months, and he's running out of places to hide. And I think he came to Pine Bend because he somehow knew you were here, knew you'd understand what he'd found. The map he left, you said it showed Station 7. Was there anything else on it? Medical symbols, supply routes, and 3 words written in the margin, the old fort. 3 days. Josie felt ice slide down her spine. Fort Calloway, that's my guess. It's the closest fort to where Station 7 was located. Been abandoned for 10 years, but the buildings are still standing. If he's going there, he's walking into a trap. Fort Calloway is indefensible now. Half the walls have collapsed and there's only one good approach road, which is why I need someone who knows the territory. Someone who can guide us there without using the obvious routes." Quinn leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Mrs. Brandt, I'm not asking you to fight. I'm not asking you to risk your life. I'm just asking you to show us the way. After that, you can come back here and we'll never trouble you again." She wanted to say no, wanted to send him away and return to the safe, small life she'd built for herself. But she kept thinking about Cormac's words, "I know you," and about the $6 she'd given to save a stranger's life, only to have him disappear. "I have a condition," she heard herself say. "Name it. Whatever we find, whatever happens, I walk away clean. No testimony, no official statements, no involvement beyond guiding you to the fort. When it's done, I come back here and you forget I exist." Quinn was quiet for a long moment. Then he extended his hand across the table. "You have my word." She shook his hand, feeling the calluses that marked a life of hard work, the firm grip of someone who kept his promises. It was the first time she'd touched another person with any real intention in 15 years. "We leave at first light," Quinn said, standing. "Pack light and warm. The nights are cold where we're going." After he left, Josie sat alone with her chicory coffee, watching the shadows lengthen across her cabin floor. She thought about the medicine satchel with its brass key, about Fort Calloway and Station 7, about all the ghosts she'd tried so hard to leave behind. Tomorrow she would guide strangers into her past. She would return to places she'd sworn never to see again. She would risk everything she'd built here. The safety, the solitude, the careful distance from a world that had taken everything she loved. But somewhere in the ruins of Fort Calloway, a man was waiting. A man who'd recognized her after all these years. A man who'd whispered, "I know you," and then disappeared into the night, leaving nothing but a map and 3 cryptic words. She owed him nothing. She didn't even know him. But she'd given him her last dollar, and for reasons she couldn't fully explain, that meant she couldn't walk away now. She climbed to her loft and packed a rucksack with essentials. Spare clothes, dried food, her canteen. The medicine satchel with its precious key. And Jacob's rifle, cleaned and loaded, ready for whatever came next. By the time she finished, full dark had fallen. Down the trail, she could see the glow of Quinn's campfire. Beyond that, the lights of Pine Bend flickered in the valley like distant stars. She lay awake most of the night, listening to the wind in the pines and wondering if she was making the worst mistake of her life. Dawn came cold and grey, the kind of morning that promised rain before nightfall. Josie was already awake, standing on her porch with her packed rucksack at her feet and Jacob's rifle slung across her back. She'd been up since before first light, unable to sleep, unable to stop her mind from circling through all the ways this could go wrong. Quinn's camp was already stirring. She could see the marshals moving through their morning routine, banking the fire, saddling horses, checking weapons with the quiet efficiency of experienced men. They didn't waste motion or words. She appreciated that. Quinn himself appeared on the trail just as the sun broke over the eastern peaks. He carried a tin cup of coffee and a piece of hardtack, which he offered to her without speaking. She accepted both, surprised by the small kindness. "We'll ride in pairs," he said as they ate. "Isaac will stay with you. He knows the mountains, and he's good in a tight spot if we run into trouble." Isaac turned out to be the young marshal she'd noticed the day before, the one who handled horses with such care. Up close, he looked even younger than she'd thought. Maybe 27 or 28, with dark hair and steady brown eyes. He nodded to her respectfully, but didn't try to make conversation. Another point in his favor, they rode out as the morning light strengthened, following a trail only Josie could see. The route to Fort Calloway that most people knew went through Miller's Pass, a broad valley that offered easy riding, but also made you visible for miles. Josie led them instead along the high ridges, through dense timber and across rocky slopes where the horses had to pick their way carefully. It was harder going, but they'd be invisible to anyone watching the main approach. And if Cormac's pursuers were smart, and Quinn seemed to think they were, they'd be watching. Isaac rode beside her, quiet and attentive. After an hour, he spoke for the first time since they'd started. "Marshal Quinn says you were a field medic during the border conflicts. A long time ago. My father was wounded in those conflicts. Took a bullet in his leg that got infected. The local doctor wanted to amputate, but a field medic saved the leg. Used some kind of special technique with carbolic acid and clean bandages." He paused. "He always said that medic was a woman, that she worked miracles with supplies that would fit in a small bag." Josie kept her eyes on the trail ahead. "Your father was lucky. He said she saved his life. Told the story to anyone who'd listen." Isaac's voice was careful, like he was testing the edge of something fragile. He described her as having steady hands and a quiet voice. said she never asked a man's name or what side he fought for, just did the work that needed doing. She didn't respond, but she felt the weight of his words. How many men had she treated in those years? How many lives saved or lost? How many stories told around fires and dinner tables, spreading her reputation across the territory? They rode in silence for another mile before Isaac spoke again. "Quinn's a good man, hard but fair. Whatever he promised you, he'll keep, and if he can't, if circumstances change, then we'll all pay the price for it. But he'll still try to keep his word." Isaac shifted in his saddle, checking their back trail out of habit. Most of us who ride with him have been there when he's had to choose between the law and what's right. He always picks what's right, even when it costs him. By midday, they stopped to rest the horses and eat a cold meal. Josie found a spring and refilled her canteen, while the marshals formed a loose perimeter, watching the surrounding forest for any sign of movement. They were deep in territory she knew well, but 15 years was a long time. Things changed. Trails shifted. Trees fell and new ones grew. Quinn joined her at the spring. "How much farther to Fort Callaway?" "At this pace, we'll reach the outer perimeter by late afternoon. The fort itself is another hour beyond that. And Station 7, southwest of the fort, maybe 2 miles. It wasn't much even when it was operational, just a large tent structure with some semi-permanent buildings for supply storage. Wouldn't surprise me if it's completely gone now." Quinn crouched beside the spring, filling his own canteen. The records we're looking for. Where would they have been kept? Medical supplies were stored in locked cabinets. Each cabinet had a manifest listing contents, origin and destination. The manifests were supposed to be destroyed after 6 months, but she hesitated, then continued. "But I kept copies. Everyone did. It was the only way to prove you'd received what you were supposed to receive, or to track when supplies went missing. So there might still be records at Station 7, if the buildings survived, if the cabinets weren't looted, if the paper didn't rot or burn or get carried off by animals." She met his eyes. "It's a lot of ifs, Marshal. Most of my work is built on ifs." He stood, brushing dirt from his knees. "But I've learned to trust them anyway, because sometimes that's all you have." They mounted up and continued. The trail grew steeper, forcing them to dismount and lead the horses across sections of loose scree. Josie's legs remembered this kind of terrain, even if her body had softened slightly from years of easier living. She moved with confidence, finding the safest paths, warning the others about loose rocks and hidden drop-offs. As they climbed, she found herself thinking about the brass key hidden in her medicine satchel. She'd kept it for 15 years, telling herself it was just a precaution, something valuable that might be useful someday. But really, she'd kept it because throwing it away would have meant admitting. She was done with that part of her life. Forever. Now it seemed her past had found a use for it after. All dot, late afternoon, brought them to a ridgeline overlooking a broad valley. Below, half hidden by trees and time, stood the ruins of Fort Callaway. The walls were still standing, though several sections had collapsed. The main gate hung at an angle, one hinge completely rusted through. Weeds and scrub pine had claimed the parade ground. A few birds circled overhead, crows or ravens, too distant to tell. "There," Josie said, pointing. "That's what's left of it." Quinn pulled out field glasses and studied the fort for several long minutes. "I don't see any movement. No smoke, no horses, no sign anyone's been there recently. The fort's too exposed. If Cormac has any sense, he'd hole up somewhere nearby and watch the approaches." She pointed to a cluster of buildings southeast of the main structure. Those were officers' quarters, built outside the walls. "Better cover, multiple exits. That's where I'd wait. And if he's not alone? If his pursuers found him first? Then we're walking into whatever they've set up for us." Quinn lowered the glasses and looked at her. "We can still turn back. No shame in it." For a moment she was tempted. The smart thing would be to retreat, to return to her cabin and let these men handle their own problems. She'd survived 15 years by being smart, by never taking unnecessary risks. But then she thought of Cormac's words, "I know you," and of the $6 she'd spent on a stranger's life. She thought of Jacob and the way he'd always stepped forward when others stepped back. And she thought of all the men and women she'd treated in field hospitals, all the lives saved and lost, all the promises made in blood and pain. "We keep going," she said. "But we do it carefully. And we assume the worst," Quinn smiled, just slightly. "You'd have made a good marshal, Mrs. Brandt." I was better as a medic. They descended into the valley as the sun began its slow drop toward the western peaks. The shadows were lengthening, turning the forest into a patchwork of light and dark. Good cover for an approach, but also good cover for an ambush. Josie led them wide around the fort's main approach, staying in the tree line, moving slowly and quietly. The horses sensed the tension and moved carefully, ears forward, testing the air for danger. As they neared the officers' quarters, Quinn raised his hand, and the group stopped. He gestured to two of his men, and they dismounted and moved forward on foot, weapons ready, checking the buildings one by one. 10 minutes later they returned. One of them shook his head, empty. But as Josie watched, she noticed something the others had missed. A thin line of smoke, barely visible against the darkening sky, rising from somewhere beyond the ruined fort. Not much, just enough to boil water or warm food. Someone was there, and they were trying not to be noticed. "There," she said, pointing. "Southwest, past the fort walls. Right where Station 7 used to be." Quinn saw it now, his expression hardening. "Could be Cormac. Could be his hunters. Could be both. Only one way to find out." Josie checked her rifle, making sure a round was chambered. "But we're losing daylight fast. If we're going to do this, we need to do it now." Quinn made the decision quickly. They would approach on foot, leaving 2 men with the horses. The rest would spread out in a wide arc, surrounding the source of that thin smoke, before moving in. If it was Cormac, they'd secure him. If it was his hunters, they'd have the advantage of surprise. "Mrs. Brandt stays back," Quinn said, but Josie was already shaking her head. "If it's Cormac and he's injured, you'll need me. And if we find Station 7 intact, you'll need someone who knows what to look for." Isaac spoke up. "She should come with us, sir. We might need a medic." Quinn studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Stay close to Isaac. If shooting starts, get behind cover and stay there." "Understood." "Understood." They moved through the failing light like ghosts, spreading out as they approached the ruins of Station 7. Josie's heart hammered in her chest, but her hands remained steady on the rifle. This was familiar territory, even after 15 years. The fear, the careful steps, the heightened awareness of every sound and shadow. As they drew closer, she began to recognize landmarks. That fallen log had been the eastern boundary marker. Those 3 pines, now much larger, had shaded the main tent where she'd performed surgeries. The ground beneath her feet remembered her, even if it looked different now. The smoke was rising from a partially collapsed stone structure, one of the supply buildings she'd mentioned to Quinn. It had weathered better than the tents, its thick walls still mostly intact. A single window opening glowed faintly with firelight. Quinn gestured for his men to hold position while he, Josie, and Isaac moved closer. They approached from the blind side, where the walls cast deep shadows. Through cracks in the stonework, Josie could hear movement inside. Someone was there, but they couldn't tell how many. Quinn positioned himself by the door, a heavy wooden thing hanging loose on its hinges, and called out, "Silas Cormac. This is U.S. Marshal Boaz Quinn. We're here to help. Come out slowly with your hands visible." Silence answered him. Then a voice from inside, rough and tired. "How do I know you're really a marshal?" "You don't. But I'm the one who's been tracking you for 8 months, trying to keep you alive long enough to testify. And I know the woman with me is the one who gave you her last dollar in Pine Bend." Another pause. "Then Mrs. Brandt?" Josie stepped forward against Quinn's silent protest. "It's me, Cormac. You said you knew me. Now I'm asking you to trust me." The door scraped open. Cormac stood in the opening, barely visible in the fading light. He looked even worse than he had in Lottie's saloon, thinner if that was possible, with eyes that held the hunted look of a man who'd been running too long. "They're coming," he said without preamble. "Maybe an hour behind me, maybe less. I tried to lose them, but—" He swayed, catching himself on the doorframe. Josie was moving before she'd consciously decided to, her healer's instinct overriding caution. She caught Cormac as his knees buckled, easing him to the ground. His skin was burning with fever. "Isaac, I need light." "Gwyn, check him for wounds." They worked quickly, Isaac holding a lantern while Josie examined Cormac. She found what she was looking for on his left side. A bullet wound, maybe 3 days old, poorly bandaged and badly infected. The surrounding flesh was hot and swollen, angry red streaks radiating outward. "Blood poisoning well advanced. He's dying," she said bluntly. "Needs a doctor, a real hospital." "We don't have time for no hospitals." Cormac's hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. "They'll find me. They have people everywhere. You don't understand how far this reaches. Then help me understand. But first, let me treat this wound, or you won't live long enough to explain anything." She sent Isaac back to the horses for her medicine satchel, while she and Quinn moved Cormac inside the building. It was warmer there, with a small fire burning in what had once been a supply hearth. Cormac had clearly been here for at least a day. There were signs of occupation, a bedroll, empty food tins. When Isaac returned with her satchel, Josie went to work. The old skills came back, as if she'd never stopped using them. She cleaned the wound with carbolic acid. Miraculously, it still worked, and debrided the infected tissue while Cormac bit down on a leather strap and tried not to scream. She packed the wound with clean bandages and gave him what little laudanum she had left for the pain. "He needs rest and proper medicine," she told Quinn, "but this will buy him time." While she worked, Quinn had been searching the building. He returned with a leather document case, its straps cracked with age, but still intact. "Found this hidden under a loose stone. Had your initials on it, JMB?" Josie's breath caught. She'd forgotten about that case, or convinced herself she had. It had been her private archive, the records she'd kept when official channels couldn't be trusted. Inside were yellowed papers, still legible after 15 years in a dry hiding place. Medical manifests, supply orders, routing documents. And there, in her own careful handwriting, notations about shipments that never arrived, about supplies meant for one destination but diverted to another. "This is it," Quinn said, his voice tight with restrained excitement. "This is exactly what we needed. These documents show the pattern of theft going back years. If we can connect them to current records." "The brass key," Cormac interrupted, his words slurred from laudanum but urgent. "She has the brass key. There's a cabinet, original installation, still locked. I found it yesterday. The manifest inside will have the signatures you need. Names, dates, authorization codes, everything." Josie pulled the key from her satchel, holding it up to the firelight. "Where's the cabinet?" "Back room. Stone compartment sealed behind false bricks." Quinn sent 2 men to search, while the rest maintained watch. Josie stayed with Cormac, monitoring his fever, checking his pulse. The infection was bad, but if he was strong enough and lucky enough, he might survive. "Why did you come to Pine Bend?" she asked him quietly. "Why did you leave that map?" "Because I remembered you." His eyes, fever-bright, fixed on her face. "Station 7, summer of 67. I was with a scout unit, took a bullet in the chest. You said I'd die if I didn't lie still, so I lay still for 3 days while you worked on other men. You came back every few hours, checked on me, changed my dressings. On the 3rd day you told me I'd live." She did remember, suddenly and completely. A young soldier, barely 20, with a sucking chest wound that should have killed him. She packed it with everything she had and prayed it would be enough. "You saved my life then," Cormac said. "When I realized what I'd discovered, what Governor Aldrich and his people were doing, I knew I needed someone who'd understand. Someone who'd seen what happens when medical supplies don't reach the people who need them. Someone I could trust. So you collapsed in front of me, betting I'd help. I bet on your nature." He smiled weakly. "And I was right." The men returned with the cabinet, a heavy iron box with the FMC seal still visible on its face. Josie inserted her key and turned it. The lock, still well made after all these years, opened smoothly. Inside were stacks of documents perfectly preserved. Gwyn pulled them out carefully, his hands shaking slightly as he read. "Governor Aldrich's signature," he said. "And Thaddeus Merrick's and—" His voice hardened. "Half the territorial administration." This isn't just corruption. It's a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels. Josie felt vindication and sorrow mixing in her chest. This was why she'd been hunted. This was why Jacob had died. Because they'd been in the way of men who saw suffering as an opportunity for profit. "We need to move," one of the marshals called from outside. "I see lights in the distance coming this way." Quinn made a quick decision. "Pack everything. We take Cormac with us, wounded or not. Isaac, you and Mrs. Brandt support him. The rest of you, defensive positions." But as they moved to leave, Josie noticed something. The way the firelight played across the walls revealed marks she'd missed before. Recent marks, scratched into the stone. Symbols she recognized from her medical training, but arranged in a pattern that meant something else. "Wait," she said. "Quinn, look at this." The marks formed a warning, crude but clear. A map of the fort and surrounding area, with X marks indicating positions. Enemy positions. Someone had been here before Cormac, watching, planning. And they'd left evidence of a trap. They knew he'd come here, Josie said, her blood running cold. They knew, and they waited for him to lead them to exactly what they were looking for. "To us," Quinn's face went hard. "Then we're not walking out of here. We're fighting our way out." The lights in the distance were growing closer, spreading out in a pattern that suggested experienced men who knew how to conduct a search. Quinn had his marshals take defensive positions around the building, using the stone walls and the failing light to their advantage. Cormac lay near the fire, conscious but barely, his fever-bright eyes tracking their movements. Josie crouched beside him, checking his pulse one more time. It was thready and fast, not good, but not immediately fatal. They might have hours or they might have minutes. There was no way to know. "How many are coming?" she asked Quinn. 8 that I can count. Maybe more." He checked his rifle, his movements calm despite the tension. "They're being careful, which means they know we're here and they're not rushing in blind. What's the plan?" "Hold them off until full dark, then slip out the back way." He glanced at the door, calculating. "The horses are a quarter-mile north. If we can reach them before they cut us off," a voice called out from the darkness, cultured and cold. "Marshal Quinn, I believe we have something to discuss." Everyone froze. The voice came from the direction of the fort ruins, maybe 50 yards away. Close enough to be heard clearly, far enough to be safe from a quick shot. Quinn moved to the doorway, keeping behind cover. "Who's speaking?" "My name is Thaddeus Merrick. I believe you've been looking for me." Josie felt her blood turn to ice. That name, she knew that name. The third ranger, the one who'd escaped when she'd killed the other 2. The one who'd sworn to see her dead. Quinn must have seen something in her face, because he glanced back at her, questioning. She mouthed the name, the third man. Understanding flickered in his eyes. "I know who you are, Merrick," Quinn called out. "Former territorial ranger, currently wanted for conspiracy and murder." "You're in a lot of trouble," Merrick laughed, the sound carrying easily in the still evening air. "I think you have that backwards, Marshal. You're in a building with limited exits, surrounded by my men, with a wounded fugitive and a woman who's been wanted for murder for 15 years. From where I'm standing, you're the ones in trouble. Mrs. Brandt acted in self-defense, and you know it. I know she killed 2 good men who were doing their duty. I know she's been hiding from justice ever since. And I know that if you hand her over along with Silas Cormac and whatever documents you found, I might be persuaded to let you and your men ride away." Quinn's jaw tightened. "Not a chance." "I thought you might say that, Pity. I was hoping to avoid unnecessary bloodshed." A pause. "You have 5 minutes to reconsider. After that, we come in, and what happens, happens." The silence that followed was heavy with threat. Quinn pulled back from the door and gathered his marshals for a quick conference. Josie stayed with Cormac, her mind racing. "He's not going to let any of us leave," she said quietly. "He can't. We have the evidence that incriminates him directly." "I know." Quinn's expression was grim. "But we're not giving up." Isaac appeared beside her, his young face set with determination. "Mrs. Brandt, there's a drainage tunnel that runs from this building toward the old parade ground, probably used for runoff from the supply storage. I noticed it when we first arrived. Is it passable?" Maybe. It's narrow and probably partially collapsed, but it might give us a way out they're not watching. Hope flickered, dangerous and fragile. Where does it exit? Near the tree line, about 100 yards west. If we could reach it, they'd see us the moment we emerged, Quinn finished. Unless, he looked at Josie, unless we had a diversion. Something to pull their attention away from that exit. Josie understood what he was suggesting before he said it. You need someone to draw their fire. Make them think we're attempting a frontal breakout while the others escape through the tunnel. I'll do it, Isaac said immediately. No, Quinn's voice was flat. You're the fastest rider. You need to be with the group that escapes, getting Cormac and those documents back to the territorial capital. He checked his pistol. I'll create the diversion. Marshal... Isaac started to protest, but Quinn cut him off. That's an order. You get these people out safely. You deliver that evidence, and you make sure Governor Aldrich and everyone connected to him pays for what they've done. He handed Isaac the document case. This is more important than any one person. You understand? Isaac's throat worked, but he nodded. Josie felt a strange calm settling over her. She'd spent 15 years running, hiding, trying to escape the violence that had taken Jacob from her. But maybe running was never the answer. Maybe some things were worth standing for, even if it cost everything. There's another option, she said quietly. Everyone looked at her. I'm the one Merrick really wants. He's been hunting me for 15 years, and now I'm right here, within his reach. She set down her rifle and stood. What if I give him what he wants? Absolutely not. Quinn's voice was hard as stone. Listen to me. If I walk out there, surrender to Merrick, his attention will be completely on me. His men will lower their guard. That's when you move, all of you, through the tunnel. By the time he realizes what's happening, you'll be gone, and you'll be dead. Isaac's voice was tight with barely controlled emotion. He'll kill you the moment he has you, maybe. Or maybe I can stall him long enough. She thought of the brass key in her satchel, of the blood-stained marshal's badge she'd left hanging in her cabin. Maybe I can make him think there's more evidence hidden somewhere, buy you time to get away. Quinn stepped close to her, his voice dropping to a near whisper. I gave you my word you'd walk away from this clean. I don't break my promises, Mrs. Brandt, and I'm releasing you from that promise. This is my choice. She met his eyes. Jacob died because I wasn't strong enough to protect him. I've lived with that for 15 years. Maybe this is my chance to do something that matters. To save lives instead of, her voice caught, instead of just surviving. Before Quinn could respond, Merrick's voice rang out again. Time's up, Marshal. What's it going to be? Josie made her decision. She picked up the medicine satchel, empty now except for a few basic supplies, and walked toward the door before anyone could stop her. Mrs. Brandt, wait! Quinn reached for her, but she was already outside, hands raised, walking toward the lights in the darkness. Merrick, she called out. It's Josephine Brandt. I'm coming out. Don't shoot. She walked slowly, heart hammering, waiting for the bullet that would end this. But it didn't come. Instead, figures emerged from the darkness, 6 men, all armed, all pointing weapons at her, and at their center, Thaddeus Merrick. He was older than she remembered, gray-haired now and heavier around the middle, but his eyes held the same cold cruelty. He smiled when he saw her. Josephine, after all these years, he gestured, and 2 of his men grabbed her arms roughly, forcing her to her knees. I've dreamed about this moment. Planned what I'd say, how I'd make you suffer for what you did to my friends. They weren't your friends. They were murderers, and you're no better. The backhand caught her across the face, snapping her head to the side. Blood filled her mouth. Where are the documents? Merrick demanded. The records from Station 7. Where are they? Burn them, she lied. Nothing left but ash. He hit her again, harder. I don't believe you. Cormac led us straight here. He wouldn't do that if there was nothing to find. Through the ringing in her ears, Josie heard something, a faint sound from the building behind her. The marshals moving, getting into position. She needed to keep Merrick's attention on her. Cormac didn't lead you anywhere, she said, spitting blood. You followed him like the second-rate tracker you've always been. This time, he didn't hit her. Instead, he crouched down, bringing his face close to hers. You think you're brave? You think this martyr act means something? You're just a woman who couldn't accept her place. Your husband learned that lesson. Tonight you'll learn it too. My husband was worth 10 of you, 20. He died because he stood up to corrupt men who preyed on the weak. She met Merrick's eyes. And you're going to fall just like they did, because the truth always comes out eventually. Big words from a woman on her knees. Merrick stood, drawing his pistol. Any last requests? Behind them, from inside the building, she heard a muffled sound. Then nothing. The marshals were moving through the tunnel now. They needed more time, just one, Josie said. I want you to know that everything you've worked for, everything Aldrich promised you, it's already over. Those documents you're looking for? They're already on their way to federal authorities. You're finished, Merrick. You just don't know it yet. His face went dark with rage. You're lying. Am I? Then why did Quinn bring 8 marshals to a place he thought held one wounded fugitive? Why did we come here at all if we didn't know exactly what we'd find? She smiled through bloody teeth. You're not chasing us, Merrick. You're walking into our trap. For just a moment, doubt flickered across his face. He glanced at his men, at the darkness beyond the firelight, calculating, and in that moment of hesitation, gunfire erupted from the tree line, not from the building, from where the marshals had left their horses, from where Isaac and the others had circled around after emerging from the tunnel. They'd had time to get into position, and now they had Merrick's men caught in a crossfire. Merrick spun toward the shooting, bringing his pistol up. But Josie was already moving. She swept her leg hard against his knees, toppling him. His gun fired wide as he fell, the bullet disappearing into the darkness. Then hands were pulling her up, dragging her back toward cover. Isaac's voice in her ear. Run, Mrs. Brandt, run! She ran. The world became chaos and gunfire. Josie ran through the darkness, Isaac's hand gripping her arm, pulling her toward the cover of fallen stones. Behind them, Merrick's men were shouting, returning fire, trying to regroup. The night lit up with muzzle flashes like deadly fireflies. They dove behind a collapsed section of wall, just as bullets chewed through the space they'd occupied a heartbeat before. Isaac pressed her down, shielding her with his own body until the initial volley passed. Are you hit? He demanded. No. You? I'm fine. He raised his head cautiously, assessing the situation. Quinn's got 3 men with him at the horses. The other 2 are providing covering fire from the building. We need to reach them before Merrick's people regroup. Another burst of gunfire punctuated his words. Josie recognized the distinctive crack of Jacob's rifle. Quinn must have given it to one of his marshals. The sound brought a sharp pang of memory. Jacob teaching her to shoot, patient and gentle, his hands guiding hers on the stock. Where's Cormac? She asked. Already at the horses. 2 of our men carried him through the tunnel while we set up the ambush. Isaac checked his ammunition. We've got maybe 2 minutes before Merrick figures out where we are. Then it's going to get much worse. They moved through the ruins in short bursts, using the broken walls and scattered debris for cover. The old fort had become a maze of shadows and death, every corner potentially hiding an enemy. Josie's healer's training made her acutely aware of how fragile the human body was, how easily a single bullet could end everything. Halfway to the horses, they ran into one of Merrick's men. He stepped out from behind a pillar, rifle rising, but Isaac was faster. The young marshal's pistol barked twice, and the man went down. Isaac didn't slow, didn't check if the man was dead or dying, just pulled Josie forward. Keep moving. Don't look back. They reached the tree line where Quinn waited with the horses. The big marshal had a cut across his forehead, blood streaming down his face, but his eyes were sharp and focused. About time, he said, boosting Josie into a saddle. Cormac's barely conscious. We need to move now, ride hard, and don't stop until we're clear of this valley. What about the other 2? Josie asked, looking back toward the building where the marshals were still providing covering fire. They know the rally point. They'll break contact and catch up. Quinn swung into his own saddle. Now ride. They burst from the trees at a gallop, the thunder of hooves drowning out the distant gunfire. Cormac was tied into his saddle, slumped forward but secured. Isaac rode beside him, one hand ready to steady him if he started to fall. Josie focused on staying in the saddle, on following Quinn's lead as he navigated through the darkness by instinct and experience. Behind them, she could hear shouting, the sound of men mounting horses, beginning pursuit. They rode for what felt like hours, but was probably less than 30 minutes, following game trails and stream beds that barely qualified as paths. The horses were strong and sure-footed, bred for this kind of work, but they couldn't maintain this pace indefinitely. Finally, Quinn raised his hand and they slowed to a walk. The horses blowing hard, their flanks dark with sweat. He guided them into a narrow canyon with steep walls on both sides, a defensible position if it came to that. "We rest here for 10 minutes, he said, dismounting. "Water the horses, check weapons, tend any wounds. Then we move again." Josie slid from her saddle on legs that trembled with exhaustion and adrenaline crash. She went immediately to Cormac, checking his pulse, his fever. He was worse. The exertion had taken its toll, but he was still breathing. "He needs proper medicine," she told Quinn. "Real doctors, a hospital bed. I've done everything I can with what I have, but it's not enough. Nearest town with a doctor is 2 days' ride north." "We don't have 2 days." Quinn wiped blood from his face, wincing. "We need to get these documents to the territorial capital, get them into the right hands before Merrick can intercept us." "How far is the capital?" 3 days hard riding, maybe 4 at the pace we can manage with Cormac wounded." Josie did the math in her head. 3 days of riding through territory where Merrick's people might be waiting. 3 days of keeping Cormac alive with inadequate supplies. 3 days during which anything could go wrong. "There's another option," she said slowly. "It's not a good one, but it might be our best chance." Quinn looked at her, waiting. "Pine Bend is half a day from here. Lottie's saloon has a back room where Cormac stayed before. It's not much, but it's shelter. We could leave him there with 1 or 2 men to guard him while the rest of us push on to the capital. Leaving him behind puts him at risk. Dragging him across 3 days of hard terrain guarantees he dies." Josie met Quinn's eyes. "You know I'm right. He needs rest and stability more than he needs to be with us. And if Merrick's people are looking for us, they'll be watching the direct routes to the capital, not backtracking to a dying mining town." One of the other marshals spoke up. "She's got a point, sir. We could leave Thompson and Garcia with him. Both good men, know how to handle themselves in a tight spot." Quinn was silent for a long moment, visibly wrestling with the decision. Finally he nodded. "All right. We make for Pine Bend, set up Cormac with guards, then the rest of us push on." He looked at Josie. "You'll stay with Cormac. Someone needs to tend his wound, and I need my men for the ride." "I'll stay," Isaac said immediately. "Sir, you need experienced riders for the capital run. I can protect Cormac and Mrs. Brandt in Pine Bend." "Isaac, it makes sense and you know it." The young marshal's jaw was set. "You need speed and experience for what's coming. This is where I'm most useful." After a moment, Quinn nodded. "All right. Thompson, Garcia, and Isaac stay with Cormac and Mrs. Brandt in Pine Bend. The rest of us ride for the capital." He checked his pocket watch, though it was too dark to read. "We move out in 5 minutes. Make your peace with whatever god you pray to, because the next 3 days are going to test us all." They mounted up and rode through the rest of the night. The exhaustion settled over Josie like a heavy blanket, but fear and determination kept her moving. Every shadow could hide an ambush. Every sound could signal pursuit. But the night remained quiet, except for the steady rhythm of hooves and the labored breathing of tired horses. Dawn found them on a ridge overlooking the valley, where Pine Bend lay sleeping. The town looked even more desolate than Josie remembered, a collection of weathered buildings slowly surrendering to time and gravity. But it was shelter, and right now shelter was everything. They descended into the town as the sun broke over the eastern peaks. The streets were empty, too early even for Hiram to open his store. Quinn led them directly to the saloon, and Isaac dismounted to pound on the door. Lottie appeared after a long minute, wrapped in a shawl, her hair loose around her shoulders. Her eyes widened when she saw them. "Lord above," she breathed. "What happened?" "No time to explain," Quinn said. "We need that back room again. The man we're carrying is badly wounded and needs care. These 3 marshals will stay to guard him. The rest of us are pushing on." Lottie's sharp eyes took in the blood, the exhaustion, the urgency. She nodded without asking more questions. "Bring him inside. I'll heat water and find clean sheets." They carried Cormac into the same narrow room where he'd stayed before. Josie cleaned and redressed his wound while Lottie brought supplies: hot water, soap, clean cloth. The older woman worked alongside her without flinching, hands steady and competent. "You've done this before," Josie observed. "Had a saloon for 20 years. You learn to deal with blood." Lottie handed her another clean bandage. "This man's in bad shape. He'll live if we keep the fever down and the wound clean. But he needs rest. Then he'll have it." Lottie's expression was grim. "And anyone who comes looking for him will have to go through me first." Outside, Quinn was organizing his remaining men. Josie heard him giving instructions, his voice low and urgent. When she emerged from the back room, he was waiting. "The documents are secured," he said, patting his saddlebag. "We'll ride relay style, 2 hours on, 10 minutes rest. Should reach the capital in 3 days, if the weather holds and we don't run into trouble. What if Merrick catches up to you? Then we fight." Quinn's expression was hard. "But he won't catch us, Mrs. Brandt. I've been out running better men than Merrick for 30 years. This won't be any different." He offered his hand and she shook it, feeling the strength and certainty in his grip. "Thank you," he said simply, "for your courage back there. For your help with Cormac. For everything. Just make sure those documents reach the right people. Make sure Aldrich and everyone connected to him pays for what they've done. You have my word." He mounted up, and his men fell in behind him. Within minutes, they were riding out of Pine Bend at a steady trot, heading north toward the territorial capital and whatever waited there. Josie watched them go, feeling strangely empty. For 15 years, she'd avoided exactly this kind of involvement, this kind of risk. And now, in the space of a few days, she'd been pulled back into a world she'd thought she'd left behind forever. Isaac appeared beside her, his young face serious. "Mrs. Brandt, we should set up a watch rotation. Merrick knows we came through here before. He might figure we'd come back." "You're right." She turned from watching Quinn's diminishing dust cloud. "Let's get organized. We've got a long wait ahead of us, and if Merrick does show up, we need to be ready." Inside the saloon, Cormac lay sleeping, his fever finally breaking. Outside, the sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist. And somewhere in the distance, Thaddeus Merrick was searching for them, driven by rage and desperation and the knowledge that his entire world was coming apart. The final confrontation was coming. Josie could feel it in her bones. And this time, she wouldn't run. They came at noon on the second day, when the sun was high and the heat made everything shimmer like a mirage. Isaac spotted them first. 6 riders approaching from the south, moving with purpose but not hurrying, confident, like men who knew exactly where they were going and what they'd find when they got there. "Mrs. Brandt," Isaac called from his position at the saloon's front window. "We've got company." Josie set down the cup of broth she'd been trying to get Cormac to drink and moved to the window. Through the dusty glass, she could see them clearly now. 6 men, all armed, led by a figure she recognized even at this distance. Thaddeus Merrick sat his horse with the bearing of a man who'd won battles before and expected to win this one too. "Where are Thompson and Garcia?" she asked. "Thompson's watching the back entrance." "Garcia's on the roof with the rifle." Isaac checked his pistol, his movements calm despite the tension. "We knew this was coming, 6 against 3. And one of us is a woman who hasn't fired a gun in anger in 15 years. You killed 2 rangers once." Isaac glanced at her. "Quinn told me the story. Said you moved like someone who'd been trained. Jacob taught me. But that was a long time ago, and I was younger then. Faster. You don't need to be fast. You need to be smart and steady." He positioned himself to cover the front door. "And from what I've seen, Mrs. Brandt, you're both those things." The riders stopped in the middle of the street, 50 yards from the saloon. Merrick dismounted slowly, deliberately, making a show of it. He was playing to an audience, even though the town appeared deserted. Windows had shutters pulled tight. Doors were barred. The few residents of Pine Bend had the sense to make themselves scarce when armed men came calling. "Josephine Brandt," Merrick called out. "I know you're in there. I know Cormac is with you. And I know Quinn and his men left you behind while they ran for the capital. Josie moved to the door, but stayed behind cover. You're wasting your time, Merrick. The documents are already gone. Your conspiracy is exposed. Maybe, or maybe Quinn won't make it to the capital alive. I've got men watching every route north. Good men, experienced men. He smiled, though there was no humor in it. But that's not really your concern anymore. Your concern is what happens in the next few minutes. We're U.S. Marshals, Isaac called out. You're surrounded and outgunned. Surrender peacefully, and Merrick's laugh cut him off. Boy, I was hunting men before you were born. Don't insult me with empty threats. You've got 3 guns in there, maybe 4 if the woman counts. I've got 6 out here and patience enough to wait you out. From the back of the saloon, Thompson's voice, movement in the alley. 2 men trying to flank us. Garcia? Isaac called up. I see them. From the roof, Garcia's rifle cracked twice. Someone screamed. Make that 1 man trying to flank us. The situation shifted. Merrick's confidence wavered just for a moment. He'd expected an easy target, not resistance. Not competent resistance. Last chance, he called out. Send Cormac out, along with any documents you have, and I'll let the rest of you walk away. No deal, Josie said. She'd retrieved Jacob's rifle from where it leaned against the wall, feeling its familiar weight in her hands. The stock still bore the marks where Jacob had carved their initials years ago, a young man's romantic gesture. You're going to have to come take him. Then that's what I'll do. Merrick gestured to his men. Burn them out. One of Merrick's men pulled something from his saddlebag, a bottle with a rag stuffed in the neck. A Molotov cocktail, crude but effective. He lit the rag and drew back his arm. Garcia's rifle cracked again from the roof. The bottle exploded in the man's hand, engulfing him in flames. He screamed and rolled in the dirt, his companions backing away from him in shock and horror. Next one goes through someone's chest, Garcia called down. His voice was steady, professional. Your choice, Merrick. But Merrick had committed now, his pride and desperation driving him forward. Take them, he snarled to his remaining men. I want Cormac alive. The others, I don't care. They came in a rush, 3 men charging the front door, while Merrick and 1 other circled toward the back. It was a coordinated assault, executed with military precision. These weren't common thugs. They were trained fighters, men who knew their business. Isaac fired through the window, dropping 1 attacker before he reached the porch. The other 2 hit the door with their shoulders, wood splintering but holding. Josie aimed through a crack in the boards and squeezed the trigger. The rifle's recoil was familiar, almost comforting. One of the attackers stumbled, clutching his shoulder. From the back, Thompson's pistol barked 3 times in rapid succession. His body hit the floor. One of Merrick's men who'd forced his way through the back entrance. Then Thompson cried out, his voice sharp with pain. I'm hit, he called. Right leg. Can still shoot, but Merrick's voice close now from the back room. Give it up. Your man's down. You're surrounded. This ends one way or another, and the longer you fight, the worse it gets for you. Josie met Isaac's eyes across the room. The young marshal's face was set with determination, but she could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. They were running out of options, running out of time. Cormac stirred on his cot, his fever-bright eyes opening. Don't let him take me, he whispered. Whatever happens, don't let him... The front door exploded inward under a combined assault. 2 of Merrick's men burst through, guns drawn. Isaac fired and 1 went down. The other's bullet caught Isaac in the side, spinning him around. And then Josie was moving, the old training taking over, muscle memory from a time when survival meant split-second decisions and steady hands. She worked the rifle's action, aimed, fired. The second attacker dropped, but more were coming. Through the broken door, through windows, and from the back room, she could hear Merrick's boots on the wooden floor, coming closer, inevitable as death itself. Thaddeus Merrick stepped into the main room of the saloon, his pistol raised and steady. Blood stained his left sleeve where Garcia's bullet had grazed him, but his gun hand was rock solid. His eyes swept the room, taking in the bodies, the wounded marshals, and finally settling on Josie. 15 years, he said. 15 years I've been waiting for this moment. Josie stood behind an overturned table, Jacob's rifle pointed at Merrick's chest. Her hands were steady, but her heart hammered against her ribs. Isaac lay bleeding a few feet away, conscious but unable to rise. Thompson was somewhere in the back, alive or dead she couldn't tell. Garcia on the roof had gone silent after taking down 2 more of Merrick's men. "It's over, Merrick," she said. "Quinn has the documents. By now they're in federal hands. Aldrich is finished, and you with him. Maybe. Or maybe I kill everyone in this room and disappear into Mexico before anyone knows I was here." He took a step closer. "Either way, you don't walk out of here alive, Josephine. That I can promise." Behind her, Cormac was trying to sit up, reaching for something. The cavalry button, she realized. He was clutching it like a talisman, his fever-bright eyes fixed on Merrick. "You worked for him," Cormac rasped. "For Aldrich. All those years, stealing medicine while people died. How do you live with yourself?" "I live very comfortably." Merrick's smile was cold. "And I'll keep living comfortably once I clean up this mess and find a new territory to work. There's always corrupt governors who need experienced men to do the dirty work." From outside, the sound of hoofbeats. Multiple riders approaching fast. Merrick's expression flickered, uncertainty, then calculation. "Reinforcements," he said. "My men from the North Road, you see? Even if Quinn got through, and that's a big if, I've got people everywhere." "You can't." The door burst open. But it wasn't Merrick's men who came through. It was Lottie Green, holding a shotgun that looked older than she was. Behind her, Hiram Polk with his hunting rifle. And behind them, more townspeople. The few who remained in Pine Bend, armed with whatever they could find. Farm tools. Old pistols. One man carried a cavalry saber that must have been 50 years old. "This is our town," Lottie said, her voice hard as granite. "And we don't take kindly to men who come in, shooting up our saloon and threatening our people." Merrick turned, caught between 2 threats. "Stay out of this, old woman. This doesn't concern you. It concerns us when you bring violence to our street." Hiram levered a round into his rifle. "We might be poor and we might be few, but we're not cowards. And we're not going to stand by while you murder people in cold blood." The standoff held for a long, tense moment. Merrick's eyes darted from face to face, calculating odds, measuring resolve. He was outnumbered now, but cornered animals were the most dangerous. Isaac chose that moment to move, his hand reaching for his dropped pistol. Merrick saw the motion and spun, his gun tracking toward the young marshal. Josie didn't think, didn't calculate, just acted on instinct older than thought, older than fear. She fired. The rifle's report was deafening in the enclosed space. Merrick staggered, his pistol discharging into the floor as his hand spasmed. He looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest, then up at Josie, his expression one of profound surprise. "You," he started to say, but blood filled his mouth. He collapsed first to his knees, then onto his face. The pistol fell from his hand and skittered across the wooden floor. Silence settled over the saloon like dust. Then Lottie was moving, kneeling beside Isaac, checking his wound. Hiram went to the back room to find Thompson. The other townspeople secured Merrick's remaining men, those still alive to secure. Josie stood frozen, the rifle still raised, still aimed at where Merrick had been standing. She'd killed before, but it never got easier. Never stopped feeling like a fundamental violation of everything she'd trained to do. Isaac's hand touched her arm, bringing her back. "Mrs. Brandt, Josie, it's over. You can put the rifle down." She lowered it slowly, her arms trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. "Is he dead?" Isaac checked Merrick's pulse to be sure, then nodded. "Your shot went straight through his heart. He was gone before he hit the ground." Cormac was laughing weakly from his cot, a sound caught between relief and hysteria. "I knew it. I knew you'd come through, just like you did back in 67. You don't let people down, Mrs. Brandt. You never did." Lottie appeared with clean bandages and began working on Isaac's wound. "You'll live, young man. Bullet went clean through, missed anything important. How did you know to come?" Josie asked her. "Saw the riders heading this way. Recognized trouble when I saw it." Lottie tied off a bandage with practiced efficiency. "Figured if these federal men were staying in my saloon, protecting someone who needed it, then they were worth protecting themselves." Hiram agreed. "So did the others. We're not many," Hiram added, "but we look after our own. And anyone who helps one of us becomes one of us. From outside, a shout, "Riders coming!" "From the north!" Everyone tensed, weapons raising. But when the riders came into view, Josie recognized Quinn at their head, flanked by his marshals. And behind them, federal troops in full uniform, led by an officer wearing captain's bars. Quinn dismounted quickly, taking in the scene, the bodies, the blood, the townspeople standing guard with their improvised weapons. His eyes found Josie, and relief washed across his weathered face. "Mrs. Brandt, thank God." He turned to the captain. "This is the woman I told you about, the one whose testimony and evidence broke this case wide open." The captain stepped forward, removing his hat. "Mrs. Brandt, I'm Captain William Hayes, Territorial Militia. Marshal Quinn brought us the documents. We've already arrested Governor Aldrich and 17 of his associates. Your evidence was exactly what we needed." Josie looked around the saloon, at the wounded marshals, at Cormac still clutching his cavalry button, at Lottie and Hiram and the townspeople who'd risked everything to stand with strangers. At Merrick's body, finally still after 15 years of hunting her. "It's really over?" she asked quietly. Quinn nodded. "It's really over. You're free, Mrs. Brandt. The charges against you were officially dismissed an hour ago. You can go anywhere, do anything. You don't have to hide anymore. Free." The word felt strange, like a language she'd forgotten how to speak. She looked at Jacob's rifle in her hands, at the initials he'd carved so long ago. Then she looked past the broken door, toward the mountains where her cabin waited. "Small and safe and lonely. I know exactly where I'm going," she said. 3 months later, the first snow of winter dusted the high peaks above Pine Bend. Josie stood in the doorway of what used to be the old assay office, watching fat flakes drift down through the late afternoon light. Behind her, the interior had been transformed. No longer an empty shell, but a working medical clinic. The shelves held proper supplies now, sent by federal authorities as partial recompense for her testimony. Real morphine, antiseptic, clean bandages, surgical instruments that weren't rusted with age. Everything a frontier doctor might need to save lives in a place where death came easy and help came late. Tommy Birch sat on the examination table. His hand, the one she'd stitched months ago, fully healed now without even a hint of infection. He was reading from a medical textbook she'd given him, his young face serious with concentration. "It says here that infection is caused by tiny organisms too small to see," he said. "Is that really true?" "It's true. Scientists proved it a few years back. That's why we clean wounds with carbolic acid. It kills those tiny organisms before they can cause trouble." "Amazing." Tommy turned the page carefully, reverent of the book's value. "Do you think I could be a doctor someday?" "A real one?" "I think you could be anything you set your mind to," she smiled. "You're smart, and you're not afraid of hard work. That's most of what it takes." The clinic door opened and Lottie entered, stamping snow from her boots. "Doc Brandt, got a patient for you. Hiram's been coughing something fierce for 3 days. Won't admit it's getting worse, but I know it is. Send him over. I'll brew some mullein tea and check his lungs." Josie had stopped correcting people when they called her Doc. It wasn't technically accurate. She'd never finished formal medical school, but titles mattered less than capability out here. After Lottie left, Isaac appeared in the doorway. He'd recovered fully from his wound, though he moved with a slight stiffness on cold days. He'd stayed in Pine Bend after the trial, officially assigned as the town's federal marshal, unofficially drawn by something he wouldn't quite name. "Mail came," he said, handing her a letter. "From the territorial capital." She recognized Quinn's handwriting immediately. Inside was a brief note and a newspaper clipping. The note read, "Mrs. Brandt, thought you'd want to see this. Governor Aldrich sentenced to 20 years federal prison. 15 of his associates received similar sentences. The other 2 turned state's evidence and are serving reduced time. Your testimony was crucial to securing these convictions. The territory owes you a debt it can never fully repay. If you ever need anything, you know where to find me. B. Quinn." The newspaper clipping showed Aldrich being led from the courthouse in chains, his face a mask of impotent rage. She studied it for a long moment, feeling nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, just a quiet acknowledgement that justice, however delayed, had finally arrived. "Good news?" Isaac asked. "Just an ending." She folded the letter and slipped it into her pocket. 20 years seems about right for 20 years of suffering he caused. The door opened again, Hiram this time looking sheepish. "Lottie said I should come see you about this cough. But it's nothing really. Don't want to waste your time. Sit down. Hiram, let me listen to your chest." As she worked, checking Hiram's breathing, preparing the mullein tea, giving instructions for care, she felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was what she was meant to do. Not hiding on a mountain, not running from her past, but using her skills to help people who needed them. Later, after Hiram had shuffled out with his tea and strict instructions to rest, Josie found herself alone in the clinic. The snow was falling harder now, beginning to accumulate. She thought of her cabin up on the ridge, empty for months now. She'd go back eventually, she supposed, but it would never be home in quite the same way. Home had become this little town, these stubborn people who'd chosen to stay when everyone else left. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find a stranger, a woman in her 30s, worn thin by hard travel, leading a small child by the hand. "Are you the doctor?" the woman asked. "They said in town there was a doctor here who helps folks, even if they can't pay much." "I'm the doctor." Josie stepped aside, gesturing them in from the cold. "What's the problem?" "My boy's been sick for a week. Fever, won't eat. I don't know what to do, and we've come so far." The woman's voice broke. Josie knelt beside the child, gentle hands checking for fever, examining his throat, his eyes. "Scarlet fever," if she was reading the signs right. "Dangerous but treatable if caught early enough. You came to the right place," she said. "I can help him." As she gathered supplies and began treatment, she thought about the path that had led her here. Jacob's death, 15 years of hiding, a stranger collapsing in the street, her last dollar given without hesitation, Gwyn and his marshals, the brass key that unlocked more than just cabinets, Merrick's final confrontation, and all the choices, good and bad, that had brought her to this moment. Sometimes the hardest thing in life was knowing when to help someone, especially when you had nothing left to give. But she'd learned something these past months, something Jacob had tried to teach her years ago. You always had something to give. Your skills, your time, your willingness to stand up when others stayed down. The child's fever would break by morning, she was certain. His mother would cry with relief, offer payment she could barely afford, and Josie would accept something small, a few eggs maybe, or help mucking out the clinic's small stable. Fair exchange, nothing owed. Through the window, she could see lights beginning to glow in Pine Bend's scattered buildings. Not many. The town would never grow large, never prosper in any conventional sense, but it would survive. And as long as it survived, she would be here doing what she'd always been meant to do. The mountains rose beyond the town, their peaks lost now in snow clouds. Her cabin was up there somewhere, waiting. But she wasn't running anymore, wasn't hiding. She was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. Tommy returned as the afternoon faded toward evening, carrying firewood for the clinic stove. The boy and his mother were settled comfortably, the fever already beginning to break. Isaac stopped by with dinner from the saloon, Lottie's way, of making sure Josie ate something besides hardtack and dried beans. "Busy day?" Isaac asked, setting the covered dishes on her desk. "Every day's busy. That's how I prefer it." He smiled, that quiet smile that reminded her less of Jacob now and more of just himself. "Town's lucky to have you, Doc Brandt." "I'm lucky to have the town," she corrected. "After 15 years alone, I'd forgotten what it was like to be part of something larger than myself." Later, after everyone had gone and the clinic was quiet, except for the child's peaceful breathing and the whisper of snow against the windows, Josie sat by the stove with a cup of real coffee, another gift from Quinn's last visit. She thought about that single silver dollar she'd given to a dying stranger, and how that one small act had changed everything. She'd spent 15 years believing survival meant isolation, safety meant distance, and healing meant forgetting. But she'd been wrong. Survival meant connection, safety meant community, and healing meant using your wounds to help others with theirs. The new silver dollar the territorial judge had given her sat on her desk, gleaming in the lamplight. Symbolic recompense, he'd called it. But it wasn't compensation for what she'd lost. It was recognition of what she'd found, purpose, belonging, and a future built not on running from the past, but on using it to build something better. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing Pine Bend in quiet white. The mountains stood guard, ancient and unchanging, and in a small clinic at the edge of a dying town, a woman who'd given her last dollar to a stranger discovered that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness lead to the most profound transformations. She wasn't the hermit of the high ridge anymore. She was Doc Brandt, healer, protector, and finally, after 15 long years, home.